Blood is supposed to be thicker than water. But in the savage hierarchy of Lycan nobility, blood is just another commodity on the auction block. Cora Sterling was bartered away for a silver mine and a council seat. Her own sisters, consumed by greed, rotted through with jealousy, inked the contract that delivered her to the most vicious alpha in the Northern Territories. They believed they were shedding dead weight, tossing the family runt into a pit where no one would ever look. What none of them understood, what no living soul suspected, was that the silent, shattered girl they sold for table scraps was fated to wear the crown. She was the Alpha King's true mate. The Sterling estate had once been the beating heart of the Silver Pines pack, deep in the old forests of Oregon. Now it was rotting from the inside out. Grand mahogany walls blistered and peeled. The pack's treasury sat bone dry, and Silas Sterling had become a ghost haunting his own house. A slow, grinding illness had hollowed him of every shred of authority. Real power had migrated, quietly, irreversibly, into the manicured and merciless grip of his two eldest daughters, Beatrice and Fiona. Beatrice was tall, ice-blonde hair, a heart that could freeze a river mid-current. She carved a restless path across the length of the study, her heels striking the floorboards like a metronome counting down to something terrible. Fiona, younger but every bit as venomous, perched on the edge of their father's desk, dragging a nail file back and forth with the casual disinterest of someone who had already decided everyone else's fate. "The debt is due." Beatrice's voice cut through the heavy, dust-choked air like a blade through gauze. Silas coughed into a linen handkerchief, his chest rattled like something broken and loose inside. Fiona scoffed without looking up from her nails. Silas's voice shook. Beatrice stopped mid-stride, her eyes locked on Fiona's. A dark, wordless understanding passed between them, the kind of look that seals a person's fate before a single word is spoken. They give him Cora. On the other side of those heavy oak doors, 20-year-old Cora Sterling went rigid. A tray of bitter herbal tea trembled in her hands, brewed for a father who could barely lift the cup. Her worn cotton dress hung off her like a burial shroud, practically swallowing her thin frame. Cora was the fracture in the Sterling bloodline. 20 years old, and she had never shifted, not once. Her sisters called her a defect, an omega born under an alpha's roof by some cruel cosmic error. They treated her worse than the hired help. She scrubbed their floors, served their meals, while they paraded through hallways in designer gowns purchased on credit the pack couldn't cover. Cora! Silas's rasp cracked with genuine shock, cutting through his own exhaustion. Quote 7. Quote 8. Beatrice slammed both palms flat on the desk, and the sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Quote 9. Quote 10. Silas's eyes closed. The words left him as barely a whisper. Dominic Blackwood is a monster. His pack, the Iron Fang, it's a slaughterhouse. Better her than us, Fiona added, sliding off the desk. Think about it, father. We hand over Cora and the debt vanishes. Silver Pines survives. Beatrice and I lock down proper mates from wealthy packs in California. We rebuild from there. But if you refuse, Blackwood guts us all. What is one defective girl weighed against the survival of an entire pack? On the other side of that door, a single tear traced down Cora's cheek. It struck the wooden tray without a sound. She stood there, waiting. Waiting for her father to rise. Waiting for the Alpha of Silver Pines to bare his teeth in defense of his youngest blood. What came instead was silence. Long, suffocating, final. Silas whispered, his voice cracked down the center like dry bone. Cora didn't scream. She didn't throw herself through that door to plead. Years of emotional wreckage had carved that instinct out of her. Begging her family was no different than howling into a sealed tomb. Nothing came back. Nothing ever had. Numbly, she lowered the tray onto a side table and turned. Her feet carried her down the grand staircase toward the servants' quarters. She needed to pack. She needed to disappear. But Beatrice had already anticipated the move. By the time Cora reached her cramped attic room, heavy combat boots were hammering up the stairs behind her. 3 enforcers from the Sterling Guard filled her doorway, broad-chested wolves who had known her since infancy. Their faces were granite. Whatever pity once lived behind those eyes had been scraped clean. "Sorry, Miss Cora," the lead enforcer muttered. His name was Harrison, a scarred wolf with a voice like gravel dragged over iron. "Orders from Beatrice. You are to be escorted to the extraction point, immediately." "Please, Harrison." Cora's voice barely held together. She backed away until her spine pressed flat against the cold window glass. Harrison's jaw clenched. He looked away, then signaled the other 2. They seized Cora by both arms and hauled her out, legs kicking, body twisting, voice lost to the stairwell walls. She was dragged through the back door of the estate. Bare feet scraped across gravel that tore her skin with every step. Waiting by a convoy of black armored SUVs, her sisters. Beatrice stood with a triumphant smirk carved into her face. Fiona clutched a velvet folder. Inside it, the signed contract. Then the lead SUV door swung open, and Dominic Blackwood stepped out. Massive, built like a fortress wall given legs. A jagged scar split his face from temple to jawline. His eyes, cold, flat, the grey of river stones in January, locked onto Cora as the enforcers threw her into the dirt at his boots. "This is the tribute?" Dominic's lip curled. He nudged Cora's trembling shoulder with a steel-capped toe. Then his gaze lifted to Beatrice, and disgust bled into it. "She's half-starved. I smell no wolf on her. Did you try to cheat me?" "She is a sterling, Alpha Blackwood," Beatrice replied, stepping forward without a flinch. Smooth. Practiced. Silas's youngest daughter. The contract required a blood daughter, nothing more. She will serve your pack as an omega, scrubbing your floors, serving your meals. A living, breathing reminder to your people that the Sterlings kneel before the Iron Fang. Dominic's mouth stretched into something that should not be called a smile. Slow, deliberate. He understood the humiliation woven into this offering, and he savored every thread of it. __quote_24__. He reached down. His fist closed around Cora's hair and wrenched her upright. She cried out, a sharp, involuntary sound, but it meant nothing to him. He hurled her toward his men like discarded weight. Throw her in the back with the cargo. If she runs, break her legs. The SUV doors slammed shut. Darkness swallowed Cora whole. Through the tinted glass, she caught one final image. Beatrice and Fiona turning their backs, drifting toward their rotting mansion. They had sold their own blood for a few more months of hollow luxury. And they never once looked back. The Iron Fang compound in Montana was not a pack settlement. It was a military fortress. High steel fences crowned with razor wire enclosed a brutalist wasteland of concrete, refinery smog, and perpetual gloom. This was Cora's new cage. 8 months of it stretching ahead like a sentence with no appeal. Dominic Blackwood wasted nothing, least of all time. The moment she arrived, her family name was stripped away. They handed her a coarse grey uniform, scratchy against her skin, the kind reserved for the lowest-ranking Omegas. Then they delivered her to Greta. The head of domestic staff was a vicious older woman who wore cruelty like a uniform of her own. She took enormous, visible pleasure in grinding the former princess into dust. 4 in the morning, every single day. Cora's hands, once soft, became landscapes of suffering. Calluses, burns from industrial stoves, chemical scars etched by harsh cleaning solvents. She scrubbed the massive stone floors of the main hall on her knees. She prepared meals for hundreds of ravenous warriors who never thanked her, never saw her. And she absorbed constant abuse, physical, verbal, relentless, from pack members who delighted in kicking a fallen sterling. She survived by disappearing inside herself. In the freezing hours past midnight, curled on a thin mattress in the damp basement she shared with 4 other Omegas, something strange stirred. A vibrating warmth bloomed deep within her chest. Not pain, not fear. Something she had never once felt back at the Sterling estate. The Iron Fang territory was brutal beyond measure. But that brutality was doing something her family's toxicity never could. It was waking something dormant. Her wolf. Suppressed for 20 years under the poisonous weight of silver pines, that creature was clawing toward the surface. Cora began hearing a voice in her mind, low, melodic, humming with the patience of a predator who knows the kill will come. 26, it whispered. 27. The grinding routine of the Iron Fang compound shattered one evening in late October. Panic ripped through the pack like wildfire. Cora was on her hands and knees in the grand dining hall, polishing the heavy oak legs of the Alpha's table, when Dominic's voice tore through the room. Twee roared, pacing frantically. Cora's rag hovered over the wood. Her hand went still. The Alpha King. Caspian Reed of the Royal Obsidian Court. A name that hovered somewhere between legend and myth. He had ruled the entire North American Lycan population for over a century. Ruthless toward corrupt alphas, an unmatched warrior who had single-handedly ended the Lycan vampire border wars decades before anyone in this room had drawn breath. But none of that was the most famous thing about King Caspian. The most famous thing was his curse. For 100 years the Alpha King had searched for his true mate. Every high-born female presented to him, rejected. One after another after another. His patience was wearing thin. The entire continent knew it. And a king without a mate was not merely lonely. He was volatile. He was dangerous. He was a force no one could predict. 3 days won't cut it, Garrett muttered, his gaze darting across the room. Not nearly enough to bury the rot in our operations. We bury what we can, Dominic snarled back. Dress the women in silk, scrub the training grounds until not a drop of blood remains. And we perform. Absolute, unquestioning loyalty. Every second of it staged. His voice dropped lower, colder. If King Caspian finds even one excuse to put my head on a pike, he'll take it without blinking. The Omegas get locked in the cellars before the royal banquet begins. I won't have some half-starved runt stumbling into the king's line of sight and spoiling his appetite. Then Dominic's gaze snagged on something beneath the table. Cora. He crossed the room in 3 strides, seized her by the collar of her uniform and wrenched her out like a dog from a kennel. __quote_35__, he hissed. His breath hit her face, rancid, hot, suffocating. He yanked her closer. Cora whispered, her eyes never left the floor. He released her like discarded weight, already spinning back to Garrett, already barking the next command. Cora scrambled toward her bucket on hands and knees. She plunged the rag into the soapy water and froze. Something rolled through her body. A heat, sudden and ferocious, flooding beneath her skin like molten iron poured into her veins. Then pain, sharp, electric, cracking at the base of her spine. Her 21st birthday fell exactly 3 days from now, the age when a lichen scent fully ripens. the age when the mate bond unlocks itself to the world. For the next 48 hours, the Iron Fang compound devoured itself in frantic preparation. Every surface scrubbed, every corner swept. Cora was driven past the edge of exhaustion, hauling crates of wine, dragging slabs of cured meat from deep storage, her arms trembling under weight her body could barely support. And with every passing hour, the fire inside her climbed higher. Fever wrapped around her like a second skin. Her vision stuttered, human sight collapsing into the razor-edged, high-contrast world of the wolf, then snapping back. "He is coming." The voice in her mind rang louder now, clearer. It wasn't just her wolf speaking anymore. It was something deeper, a pull, a magnetic current threaded through her very blood, dragging her attention south, toward the road. On the afternoon of the third day, the atmosphere over the territory shifted. The perpetual smog thinned, then broke apart, shoved aside by a pressure so dense it felt like the mountains themselves were leaning inward. The aura of the Alpha King. It crushed downward like a physical weight. Lower-ranking wolves buckled where they stood, dropping to their knees, gasping through clenched teeth. Greta found Cora slumped against the kitchen wall, drenched in sweat, her uniform dark with it. Greta seized her arm and shoved her toward the heavy iron door, the one leading down to the subterranean root cellars. Cora had no strength left to resist. She half fell down the stone steps into absolute blackness. Behind her, the iron door swung shut with a boom that echoed through the chamber. Then, the hard final clack of a padlock snapping into place. Darkness swallowed her whole. The air down here was freezing, damp, thick with the stench of rotting potatoes and hanging slabs of cured meat. Cora collapsed onto the dirt floor and curled into herself as wave after wave of agony ripped through her muscles, her bones shifting, her tissues stretching, her body tearing itself apart from the inside. She was about to shift for the first time, alone, in the dark, locked in a cage no one would open. And above her, muffled but unmistakable, the heavy drum roll of tires on gravel and the roaring cheers of the Iron Fang pack as the king arrived. King Caspian Reed emerged from the armoured Bentley, and the Iron Fang courtyard died. Not a whisper, not a shuffled boot, not even the wind dared move. He unfolded from the vehicle like a blade leaving its sheath. 6 feet 4 inches of coiled, barely contained violence wrapped in a tailored black suit. Shoulders broad enough to block a doorway, hair dark as a moonless sky. And those eyes, violet, unnatural, wrong in a way that made your hindbrain scream predator before your conscious mind caught up. They swept the kneeling pack with the warmth of a glacier surveying gravel. Gideon flanked him without a word. His beater's gaze didn't land on Dominic, didn't land on the groveling wolves. It traced rooftop lines, window angles, exit routes. Tactical arithmetic performed in silence. Alpha Dominic Blackwood. Caspian's voice rolled across the cobblestones. Smooth, deep, saturated with a command that wasn't earned, but born. Dominic's forehead dipped closer to the ground, as though invisible hands pressed it down. __quote _43 __. Dominic lurched upright. He assembled a smile on his scarred face, the kind of smile that looked borrowed, ill-fitting, grotesque. __quote _44 __. Caspian did not smile back. He stepped forward. Each boot strike rang against stone like a judge's gavel. He inhaled through his nose, slow, deliberate, and his expression curdled with faint disgust. Your pack smells of fear and cheap iron, Dominic. Let us hope your banquet proves more palatable than your hospitality. The tour that followed was a slow-burning catastrophe for the Iron Fang Alpha. Caspian missed nothing. His violet gaze caught the bloodstains near the training pits, hastily scrubbed, but not hastily enough. It catalogued the bruised faces of lower-ranking wolves Dominic hadn't managed to stash out of sight in time, the terrified way their eyes dropped to the dirt when the king's shadow passed over them. Caspian said nothing about any of it, and his silence was infinitely worse than accusation. By the time the evening banquet filled the grand hall, Dominic's shirt clung to his back with sweat. He had positioned Caspian at the head of the massive table, flanking the king, the wealthiest females, the most beautiful faces the pack could produce. A carefully arranged display of availability. And at the center of that display sat Dominic's own sister, Sylvia, a woman whose vanity was matched only by her ambition. She practically fused herself to the arm of Caspian's chair. Caspian sat rigid as carved stone. A glass of dark wine rested in his hand, barely touched. Sylvia's voice washed over him like water over rock, present, persistent, utterly ignored. He was exhausted in a way that sleep could never repair. 100 years. 100 years of crossing territories, scanning crowds, inhaling the scent of millions of females, searching for one specific chemical signature his blood would recognize. And every single time, nothing. Hollow air. Empty disappointment stacked upon empty disappointment until the hollow space in his chest stopped aching and simply hardened, calcified into cold, dense rage. His inner wolf, a black beast of myth, enormous even by royal standards, paced behind his eyes, clawing, snarling, demanding a mate that Caspian had begun to suspect the world had never made. "Your Majesty," Sylvia purred. She leaned close enough that her perfume hit him like a physical assault, cloying, chemical, suffocating. "If the accommodations are not to your liking, I would be more than happy to show you my personal quarters. They are much warmer." Caspian turned his head, slowly. Those violet eyes settled on her like crosshairs finding their mark. The temperature in the grand hall plummeted. Every wolf at the table felt it. A primal, atmospheric drop that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with what sat at the head of that table. Sylvia's throat bobbed. Her body shrank back before her brain gave the order. __quote_48__. Caspian said, his voice soft, almost gentle, a lethal purr threaded with silk and razors. __quote_49__. Sylvia went white. She scrambled backward so violently her chair nearly toppled. The grand hall held its breath, every fork frozen, every jaw locked. Dominic choked on his drink. Wine dribbled down his chin. His eyes bulged with undisguised terror. Caspian rose from the table. The walls felt closer than they had a moment ago. The air tasted thick, recycled, contaminated with perfume and desperation, and the pathetic musk of sycophants competing for scraps of his attention. He needed out. He needed sky above him and silence around him. He placed both hands flat on the table to excuse himself. And then something happened. A draft slivered through the gap beneath the kitchen doors, and riding that current of cold air, a scent. Caspian went rigid. His heart, which had kept its bored, mechanical tempo for 100 years, detonated against his ribcage like a battering ram. The fragrance was faint, buried under roasted meat, cheap wine, and the choking cloud of Sylvia's perfume. But it was there, and it was devastating. Blooming golden freya, wild honey. The sharp electric bite of a mountain thunderstorm rolling through clean air. Nothing in a century of living had touched him like this. His inner wolf, sulking, half asleep a heartbeat ago, hurled itself against the walls of his mind with a roar so savage it forced Caspian's eyes into a blazing, incandescent purple. The word detonated through his skull. It vibrated down through marrow. Gideon caught it, the sudden stone stillness of the king, the violet fire flooding his irises. He stepped forward instantly, fingers closing around the hilt of the silver blade at his hip. __quote _50 __. Caspian didn't hear him. He vaulted the grand table in a single motion, porcelain shattering, crystal goblets exploding against stone. Iron-fang wolves shrieked and crushed themselves flat against the walls as the Alpha King moved towards the kitchen doors with the focused, terrifying gait of a predator locked on a blood trail. Dominic scrambled after him, face drained of every drop of color. "Your Majesty, please. The kitchens are filthy. You shouldn't." Caspian never slowed. His shoulder hit the heavy swinging doors and tore them clean off the hinges. The crash was deafening. Kitchen staff screamed, pots clanging against tile as the towering king invaded their world. Caspian stopped, eyes closed, chest heaving. He pulled another breath through his teeth, and the scent hit him tenfold. Stronger here. Maddening. It coiled around every nerve, dragged him forward like a marionette jerked by invisible wire. He tracked it with surgical precision, past the cowering staff, past the roaring heat of industrial ovens. His boots stopped at the back of the pantry. A heavy iron door set flush into the floor, sealed with a thick steel padlock. Through the cracks in that door poured the fragrance of freer and wild honey, and beneath it the sharp metallic bite of blood. The raw, desperate pheromones of someone drowning in pain. "Open it!" Caspian's voice dropped into a demonic dual tone that rattled the foundation stones beneath their feet. Dominic caught up, took one look at that cellar door, and his bladder surrendered. __quote _53 __. Caspian moved, faster than any eye could register. His hand closed around Dominic's throat, and 300 pounds of alpha dangled off the ground like a scarecrow pulled from its post. "Send!" Claws extended. 5 points of razor bone pierced the skin of Dominic's neck. Blood beaded in slow, deliberate drops. __quote _55 __. Caspian's whisper was worse than any scream. Violet eyes burned with something unholy, something older than rage. "And she is hurt. I will reduce your entire territory to ash, and I will make you eat the cinders. Give me the key." Dominic's fingers scraped uselessly against Caspian's wrist. His face deepened to purple. "Greta has it," he choked. Caspian released him the way a man discards trash. He did not wait for Greta. Both hands closed around the steel padlock, muscle corded beneath skin, a sickening crunch of metal, and the lock tore free like paper. He wrenched the iron door open and plunged into the dark, freezing stairwell below. "Bring light," Gideon ordered the kitchen staff overhead. He wrenched a heavy flashlight from its wall mount and followed his king down into the dark. At the bottom of the stairs, overturned crates, the stench of rotting vegetables. And there, on the damp dirt floor, Caspian found her. Cora was curled into herself. Her frail body convulsed through a forced, unguided transition. No mentor, no protection, no mercy. Skin burning, bones shifting, snapping at agonizing intervals. She wept without sound. Her fingers twisted into her own hair, gripping hard enough to tear. She looked impossibly small, impossibly broken. Filthy grey rags hung off a malnourished frame like burial cloth on a skeleton. But as Caspian stepped closer, Gideon's flashlight beam cutting into that black corner, the convulsions stopped. Just stopped. Cora gasped. Her body went rigid, then still. The searing agony of the shift drained away, replaced by something she had never once felt in 20 years of living. Warmth. Safety. A wave of it, sudden and overwhelming, flooding every shattered nerve. She uncurled slowly, lifted a face streaked with dirt and tears, and through the blur, she saw him. A man of impossible stature, dressed in midnight black, looking at her as though she were the only thing that existed in the universe. Caspian dropped to his knees in the dirt. He did not hesitate, did not glance at his tailored suit. His massive hands reached out, trembling, and cupped her cheeks with a gentleness that contradicted every terrifying thing about him. The moment his skin met hers, a shock wave of electricity detonated between them. The bond sealed itself like a lock finding its key after 100 years. __quote _59 __. Caspian breathed. His voice cracked under the weight of a century's worth of suppressed longing. He pulled her fragile body into his arms, buried his face against her neck, inhaled the scent he had spent his entire existence searching for. Cora, exhausted, brutalized, bewildered beyond comprehension, pressed her head against the broad expanse of his chest. And for the first time in 20 years, she felt completely, undeniably safe. Above them, at the top of the cellar stairs, Dominic Blackwood stared down. The realization hit him like a blade between the ribs, slow, cold, absolute. He had just signed his own death warrant. He had enslaved the Alpha Queen. The silence in the grand hall of the Iron Fang compound shifted. It was no longer respectful stillness. It was the suffocating, terror-soaked quiet of a graveyard where the dead might still be listening. The lavish banquet sat abandoned, roasted meats cooling, wine going stale in crystal goblets. Every wolf in attendance, from the highest-ranking enforcer to the vainest socialite, stood paralyzed, eyes locked on the shattered kitchen doors. When King Caspian Reed emerged from the corridor's shadows, the collective gasp devoured whatever oxygen remained in the room. This was not the immaculate, untouchable monarch who had arrived hours earlier. His bespoke midnight black suit jacket was gone, wrapped tight around the fragile, trembling bundle cradled in his arms. His crisp white shirt bore streaks of cellar dirt, and his eyes, those famously terrifying violet irises, blazed with a lethal, unrestrained luminescence that made grown wolves look away. Against his broad chest, Cora pressed her face into the crook of his neck. Her thin, bruised fingers clutched fistfuls of his shirt with the desperate grip of someone who had never once been given a reason to hold on, and now refused to let go. To the Iron Fang pack, she was the nameless Sterling Runt, the defective Omega they had kicked, starved, and mocked for 8 months. To the king, she was the center of the universe. Dominic Blackwood stumbled into the hall behind them. His face had gone the color of wet ash. He looked less like an alpha and more like a man walking the final steps to the gallows. Caspian did not shout. He did not roar. His voice, when it finally came, was a low melodic purr that traveled through the floorboards and sank into the marrow of every wolf in that room. __quote _60 __, Caspian murmured. His eyes never left the trembling girl cradled in his arms. Gideon had followed them up from the dark without a sound. Now he stepped forward, one hand resting on the silver hilt of his blade like it belonged there. Quote 61, quote 62. Caspian's voice was soft, almost gentle. The words were not. No one leaves. Sever the communication lines. I want the airspace above this territory locked down. Already done, sire, Gideon replied, smooth, unhurried, and gestured toward the perimeter of the Grand Hall, where heavily armed royal guards were flooding in from every entrance. Weapons drawn, exits blocked. Dominic collapsed to his knees. His massive frame shook like something hollow. Your Majesty, King Caspian, please. I swear on my ancestors, I did not know she was your mate. She was sold to me by her own family. The Sterlings of Oregon sold her to settle a border debt. She is a defect, unshifted. Caspian moved so fast, the air split. He didn't set Cora down, he simply shifted his weight, and a concussive wall of pure alpha aura detonated outward. It struck Dominic like a battering ram. The Iron Fang Alpha launched backward, crashing through a heavy oak table. Splinters erupted. Silverware scattered like shrapnel across stone. Dominic screamed. The atmospheric pressure of the king's dominance flattened him against the floor and snapped his collarbone with a sound every wolf in the room heard. Caspian walked toward the broken man. Slow, deliberate. Cora whimpered against his chest, pressing closer, terrified of the violence radiating off him. He felt her distress instantly. The aura pulled back like a tide retreating. His expression softened. His fingers moved through her tangled hair with impossible gentleness. "Shh, little one, you are safe," he whispered against her temple. "No one in this room will ever lay a hand on you again." Then the glowing eyes turned back to Dominic. Code returned. "You chained my queen in a freezing, rat-infested cellar. You starved her. You worked her until her hands bled." "It was Greta," Dominic sobbed. A trembling, bloody finger thrust toward the kitchen staff huddled in the corner. "Greta oversaw the Omegas. She had the key." Greta, the vicious head of the domestic staff, let out a piercing shriek and bolted for the servants' exit. 3 steps, that's all she managed. 2 royal guards brought her down hard, slamming silver cuffs around her wrists before she could draw another breath. Caspian stared down at Dominic. The expression on his face was not rage. It was worse. It was disgust. Absolute, arctic, final. A true alpha takes responsibility for his territory. You point at your subordinates to explain the rot in your own house. A pause. "You are a coward, Dominic Blackwood." Caspian raised his free hand. The Grand Hall went silent, that suffocating kind of silence where even heartbeats sound too loud. He addressed the terrified pack. "Hear the judgment of the Royal Obsidian Court. As of this moment, the Iron Fang pack is dissolved. Dominic Blackwood is stripped of his title, his lands, and his wealth. He is declared rogue and will be transported to the subterranean prison at Blackgate to await execution for high treason." A wail tore from Dominic's sister Sylvia. One sharp glare from Gideon killed it in her throat. Caspian continued, his voice ringing now like a funeral bell. Quote 75, quote 76. Gideon bowed. Caspian turned his back on the wreckage of Iron Fang leadership. He looked down at Cora, who had finally spent every last tear and was sliding into unconsciousness, her body utterly wrecked from the interrupted transition and the savage crash of adrenaline draining out of her all at once. Quote 77, Caspian declared. Not a request, not a discussion, a verdict. He carried her out of the Grand Hall, stepping across the threshold of her personal hell and into the cool, biting mountain air of the courtyard. Within minutes, the heavy thwack-thwack of a military-grade Sikorsky helicopter tore through the valley. Caspian boarded with Cora locked in his arms. He wouldn't let even the royal medics lay a finger on her. Not yet. As a helicopter banked south towards the sanctuary of the Royal Obsidian Court in Colorado, he glanced down at the Iron Fang compound shrinking below. The immediate threat neutralized. But something colder and far darker was already coiling in his chest. Dominic was only the buyer. The true architects of Cora's misery were still breathing comfortably in the lush forests of Oregon. The Sterlings were going to learn, in vivid, permanent detail, the cost of selling their own blood. The Royal Obsidian Citadel was a marvel of modern architecture fused with ancient lichen tradition. Nestled inside a heavily fortified private valley deep within the San Juan Mountains near Telluride, Colorado, the estate was a fortress of glass, black marble, and warm timber, perched above a pristine alpine lake. Cora woke 3 days later. She didn't open her eyes right away. For the last 8 months, waking up meant the harsh glare of a bare bulb, the freezing dampness of the basement, Greta's steel-toed boot slamming into her mattress. But this morning, no freezing dampness. She was lying on a mattress so impossibly soft it felt like a cloud, swallowed in thick, downy comforters that smelled faintly of pine-rich parchment and that intoxicating bloom of freesia and wild honey. She opened one eye, cautiously. The room was enormous, drenched in soft golden morning light, pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows. A fire crackled low in a massive stone hearth. __quote _ 78 __. Cora flinched, violently, scrambling backward until her spine cracked against the velvet headboard. She dragged the covers to her chin, heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Sitting in a leather armchair beside the bed was King Caspian. He'd discarded his formal suits, dark trousers, a charcoal Henley stretched across his heavily muscled frame. He looked exhausted, dark crescents beneath his violet eyes. But the instant he registered her panic, he raised both hands slowly, palms open, unarmed. "I apologize," Caspian said softly, his voice deliberately held at a gentle, unthreatening octave. "I didn't mean to startle you. I am Caspian." Cora stared at him. Her mind raced. She remembered the cellar, the agony of bones grinding and shifting beneath her skin, the sudden, overwhelming warmth when this giant of a man had pulled her from the dirt. You're the king." "To the world?" "Yes," Caspian replied, leaning forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. "To you, I am simply your mate." Cora swallowed hard. Her throat was sandpaper. "That's impossible. I'm a defect, an unshifted omega. The Alpha King doesn't mate with defective runts." Her voice cracked. "My sisters told me." The ingrained trauma of her family's abuse, rising to the surface like something rotting pulled from deep water. __quote _87 __. A storm of pure rage swept across Caspian's face, so sudden, so violent that Cora recoiled. But he caught himself, eyes shut. One long, controlled breath to cage the wolf thrashing behind his ribs. When his lids lifted, the fury had dissolved. What replaced it was something she had no framework for. Tenderness. Raw. Aching. Bottomless. "Your sisters are fools," Caspian said, rising slowly to his feet. He crossed to a silver tray on the side table, poured a glass of fresh water and carried it back. He didn't extend it toward her, didn't press. He set it on the nightstand, close enough to reach, easy enough to ignore. "You are not cursed, Cora. You are a late bloomer, yes, but not because you are weak." He paused, letting those words settle into the silence between them. "Dr. Croft, my chief medical officer, examined you while you slept. The cleaning solvents you were forced to use at the Iron Fang compound contained trace amounts of liquid silver." His jaw tightened. A cheap, cruel tactic. Rogue packs use it to suppress the wolves of their captive omegas. Cora stared at the glass of water. Her mind clawed at the edges of what he was telling her, trying to hold the shape of it. Silver poisoning. Yes, Caspian confirmed, combined with severe malnutrition and the psychological torture your family inflicted. Your wolf was buried deep, spending every ounce of strength just keeping your human body alive. His voice dropped, softened. But she is there, Cora. I felt her. She is magnificent. Tears burned behind her eyes. 20 years of being told she was nothing, a burden, a blemish on the proud Sterling name. And now, the most powerful Lycan breathing on this earth stood before her, looking at her like she was sacred. Why me? The whisper barely left her lips before a tear escaped down her cheek. Caspian lowered himself to the edge of the bed, carefully, deliberately keeping distance so the wall she'd built wouldn't crack from pressure she wasn't ready for. He reached out, those large, warm fingers, and brushed the tear from her skin. The mate bond detonated at the point of contact. Electric, shimmering, a current that raced down Cora's spine and lodged somewhere deep in her chest. Because the moon goddess knew I needed a queen whose heart was strong enough to survive the dark, he murmured. And because she knew you needed a sanctuary. His voice turned to iron, quiet iron, the kind that doesn't bend. __quote _98 ___. Over the next 2 weeks, the Royal Obsidian Citadel reshaped itself around its new queen. Caspian was patient beyond reason. He didn't push. He let her set the rhythm of their closeness, content to sit beside her near the fire, read aloud in the vast library, or walk the shores of the alpine lake, while silence did the talking neither of them needed words for. Under Dr. Croft's watch, and nourished by the nutrient-dense meals flowing from the royal kitchens, Cora's broken body began stitching itself back together. Bruises faded like ink washed from parchment. Her skin took on a warm, luminous glow. The hollows beneath her cheekbones filled. Color returned to her lips. But the deepest transformation wasn't visible. Without the toxic rot of her old pack, without the liquid silver seeping through her skin at Ironfang, the predator sleeping inside her was waking up. And she was waking up furious. It happened under the full moon. Caspian and Cora stood on the wide balcony of their suite, the lake below them painted in silver light. Then, without warning, Cora's knees buckled. She hit the stone as a tidal wave of raw, uncut power tore through her bloodstream. This was nothing like the root cellar, nothing like that agonizing, forced shift meant to break her. This was release. Caspian stepped back immediately. His eyes blazed, not with fear, with pride, with awe. He gave her space. Her bones lengthened and snapped into new architecture, seamless, fluid, without a single scream. Her senses detonated outward. Pine needles on a ridge miles distant, the steady heartbeat of perimeter guards, and drowning out everything else, the overwhelming, intoxicating scent of her mate. When the shift completed, Caspian dropped to one knee, his head bowed low. What stood on that balcony was not a timber wolf. Cora had shifted into something that hadn't walked North American soil in over 3 centuries. A lichen of royal lineage, massive, luminous, her fur so white it burned the eyes like sun on fresh snow. Her gaze pulsed with a celestial silver light, ancient and unblinking. She towered over the average alpha. Power radiated from her in slow, calm waves, the kind of power that doesn't need to announce itself. The white wolf. The ultimate mark of the moon goddess's favor. Cora tilted her great head toward the peaks and released a howl, long, melodic, rolling off the mountains like a hymn of pure liberation. From the darkened interior of the suite, another shape emerged. Caspian's wolf, midnight black, the size of a grizzly bear, a beast that made seasoned warriors lose bladder control. And this terrifying creature padded across the balcony submissively. He pressed his enormous head beneath her chin, nuzzling, yielding, acknowledging his queen. 2 states away, a very different scene was taking shape. In the rotting manor of the Silver Pines pack, Beatrice Sterling tore open an envelope stamped with a heavy black wax seal of the Obsidian Court. Fiona lounged on the sofa, swirling cheap champagne in a glass that had seen better decades. Well? Fiona's patience cracked first. Beatrice's eyes moved across the heavy parchment, slowly, and then a smirk, cold, triumphant, spreading like frost across glass. No, she breathed. Greed sharpened every syllable. It's an invitation. The Alpha King is hosting a royal gala at month's end. He's found his mate. Every regional alpha and their families are commanded to attend the coronation of the new queen. Fiona shot upright. He found a mate. Who is she? Doesn't say. Beatrice waved the letter like it was irrelevant. Some snivelling, high-born princess from the European courts, probably. But listen to me, Fiona. This is our moment. Every wealthy, powerful alpha on the continent, one room. If we play this right, we secure an alliance. We rebuild our fortune. The Sterling name rises again. Crystal clinked against crystal. Laughter filled the dusty, hollow study. 2 sisters toasting a future they couldn't begin to fathom. Because the queen they were so desperate to meet was the same sister they had sold for scrap. Over the next 4 weeks, the Obsidian Citadel became a forge. Cora was no longer that broken, trembling girl dragged from her father's house. Under Caspian's fiercely protective guidance, under the rigorous tactical training of Beta Gideon and lead warrior Penelope, she stepped into her birthright. Her white wolf was not decoration, not symbol alone. It was the physical manifestation of a dominant ancient bloodline that had slept within the Sterling line for generations, waiting. Cora learned to harness her aura, a presence so serene on the surface, so overwhelmingly powerful beneath, that even the most battle-scarred royal guards instinctively bared their necks when she passed the training grounds. They couldn't help it. Their wolves recognized something older than rank. Caspian watched this transformation unfold with awe tangled inside possessive pride. He draped her in the world's finest, silks spun in Milan, diamonds pulled from the deep earth. But the most precious thing he gave her wasn't material. It was agency. For the first time in Cora Sterling's life, her voice mattered. She took her place at his side during council sessions, her mind razor-edged, untouched by the bloated pride that poisoned most alpha bloodlines. Ancient warlords listened when she spoke, and then they nodded, quietly, respectfully. But behind closed doors, Caspian was building something else entirely. A masterpiece stitched from patience and fury. __, quote _106 __. Gideon reported one evening. He stood before the massive mahogany desk in Caspian's study, spine straight, voice measured. Cora sat curled in a leather wingback chair near the fire. A leather-bound history of the Northern Pax lay open across her lap. The firelight caught the gold leaf on its spine. Silas Sterling, along with his daughters Beatrice and Fiona, have RSVP'd. They requested VIP suites, citing their ancient lineage. Caspian released a chuckle so dark it barely qualified as laughter. His violet eyes flashed like heat lightning behind storm clouds. Give them the suites in the West Wing. Let them gorge on the illusion of grandeur. He paused. The higher the pedestal, Gideon, the more devastating the fall. Cora's gaze lifted from the page. Anxiety flickered through her chest, sharp, instinctive, at the sound of those names. But her white wolf surged immediately. flooding her veins with an icy, absolute calm. She was not the prey. Not anymore. She asked softly, setting the book aside. He crossed the room without hesitation, knelt beside her chair, took both her hands in his, and pressed his lips to her knuckles. His gaze burned with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. His voice dropped low, controlled fury wrapped in silk. He tightened his grip on her fingers. 1 week later, the royal coronation gala began. The obsidian citadel had been transformed into a breathtaking monument to power and wealth. Thousands of candles floated above the grand ballroom, suspended like captured stars, their light pouring across black marble floors. Cascading waterfalls bordered the dance floor, their soft thunder swallowed by music and murmured ambition. Alphas, betas, and high-ranking dignitaries from every corner of North America arrived in fleets of luxury vehicles. Jewels glittered at throats and wrists. Political hunger glittered in eyes. And among them, the Sterlings. Beatrice wore a plunging emerald green gown. She had purchased it entirely on a high-interest loan taken out specifically for tonight. Fiona moved beside her in crimson silk, her gaze darting from face to face, greedy, calculating, appraising the wealth of every unmated alpha in the room. Silas trailed behind them both, frail, hollow, leaning hard on a silver-tipped cane like a man held upright only by obligation. Beatrice hissed, slapping his arm where no one could see. Fiona snatched 2 flutes of vintage champagne from a passing tray. Beatrice snapped. The ballroom thrummed with electric anticipation. Rumors had circulated for weeks about the king's new mate. Some whispered she was a fierce warrior from the European covens. Others whispered she descended from the moon goddess herself. No one knew her name. No soul had glimpsed her face. At the stroke of midnight, a gong, deep, ancient, bone-rattling, split the ballroom air. The music cut dead. Every murmured conversation evaporated as a pressure descended on the room. Thick, suffocating. The unmistakable aura of the Alpha King. The crowd cleaved apart like parted waters as King Caspian Reed stepped onto the grand balcony overlooking the floor below. Lethal elegance given form. A tailored pitch-black military tunic, the silver crest of the obsidian crown blazing across his chest. The raw power rolling off him bent every wolf on the main floor into submission. Heads bowed, spines curved, instinct overriding pride. "Welcome." Caspian's voice struck the vaulted ceilings and returned in waves. No microphone, none needed. __, quote, _121, __. A gasp tore through thousands of throats simultaneously. A white lichen. The myth made flesh and bone and breath. From the darkness gathered behind Caspian, she materialized. Cora stepped into the cascading brilliance of the grand chandeliers. She was devastating. A custom gown of white silk and silver thread poured over her frame like liquid moonlight. A crown of intertwined silver branches and diamonds nestled against raven hair. But the gown did not command thousands of wolves. Her aura did. Her spine, forged steel. Her chin, elevated, unbreakable. And her eyes. Those eyes, once blown wide with terror, now blazed with the blinding celestial silver light of the white lichen. Down on the polished marble floor, Silas' sterling champagne flute slipped from his fingers. Glass detonated against stone. The sharp crack ricocheted through the dead-silent ballroom. He stumbled backward, hand pressed hard over his chest. Beatrice and Fiona turned rigid. Color fled their faces until they resembled something dragged from a grave. Fiona's hands shook so violently that wine cascaded down her crimson dress. Up on the balcony, King Caspian's violet eyes found the Sterling family with the surgical precision of a marksman locking coordinates. He extended his hand and guided his queen down the grand, sweeping staircase. As they descended, the crowd peered away on instinct, leaving the three Sterlings stranded, utterly exposed in the center of the open floor. "Silas Sterling!" Caspian's voice had shed every trace of welcome. What remained was a blade of pure ice. __quote _123__. Silas collapsed to his knees. Tears carved wet lines down his weathered face. Quote 124, quote 125. Caspian's snarl carried the dual-toned demonic timbre of his alpha voice, and it drove Silas into a deep, agonizing bow. Beatrice, propelled by desperate delusion, stepped forward. She forced a trembling smile onto her lips. "Your Majesty, there is a misunderstanding. This is a joyous occasion. Our sister, the Queen, we sent her away to learn discipline. We always knew she was destined for greatness." Cora halted at the base of the stairs. She unlinked her arm from Caspian's. Slowly, deliberately, she walked toward her older sister. Her voice carried melody but zero warmth. Cold silk draped over sharpened iron. Beatrice shrieked, a shaking finger thrust toward Cora. Caspian's lips curled into something that barely qualified as a smile. Cold, predatory, the kind of expression that makes the blood in your veins slow down. He snapped his fingers, a single sharp crack, and the massive oak doors of the ballroom groaned open. 4 royal guards marched in. Between them, dragged like a slaughtered deer, was a man wrapped in silver chains, his face swollen, his posture broken. Every shred of arrogance beaten out of him like dust from a rug. Dominic Blackwood, former Alpha of Ironfang, reduced to something less than a dog on a leash. Fiona let out a choked, strangled sound. She shrank behind her kneeling father like a child hiding from thunder. Former Alpha Blackwood. Caspian's voice was not a request. It was a command forged in iron. __quote _132__. Dominic collapsed to his knees. He wouldn't look at Cora. "Couldn't," he rasped, his voice cracking like dry wood. Peter Gideon stepped forward. He unrolled the heavy parchment slowly, deliberately, holding it high so every pair of eyes in that ballroom could see. At the bottom, scrawled in thick black ink, 3 signatures: Beatrice, Fiona, Silas Sterling. The room erupted, not in whispers, in outrage. Selling a blood relative was an abomination against the Lycan Accords, a sin that stained not just the signers, but anyone who looked away. Cora gazed down at the 3 people who had made her existence a waking nightmare. Her silver eyes blazed like twin moons behind storm clouds. She said, not shouting, not trembling, stating. A pause, heavy as a gravestone. She turned to her father. "Silas choked out," Cora announced. Her voice carried the absolute, unshakable authority of the obsidian crown. Every syllable landed like a hammer on an anvil. __quote _141 Beatrice sobbed. Her fingers clawed at the marble floor, nails scraping stone like an animal begging to not be thrown into the cold. Quote 142, quote 143, Cora replied, cold as the chains around Dominic's wrists. "You are banished from the northern territories. You will live as rogues. If you are found within 500 meters of our borders, my guards will shoot on sight." Then she turned her back on them, the ultimate gesture. Not rage, not revenge, dismissal. They no longer existed in her world. She climbed the stairs, placed her hand into Caspian's waiting palm. __quote _ 145 _ Gideon barked. The guards dragged the weeping, shattered remains of the Sterling family from the ballroom. Their wails echoed off the vaulted ceilings, fading, until the heavy iron doors slammed shut and swallowed the sound whole. The era of their cruelty, permanently sealed in silence. Caspian pulled Cora close. His eyes swept over the stunned, breathless crowd below. Quote 146, quote, he declared, his voice a thunderous vow that pressed against the walls. Quote 147 _ The orchestra swelled. A triumphant waltz poured through the hall as Caspian spun Cora onto the dance floor. She rested her head against his chest, listened to the steady, unhurried rhythm of his heart. She was no longer a captive. She was the queen, and her reign had just begun. Cora Sterling's story burns itself into memory for one reason. The truest power often slumbers in the quietest souls. What started as a harrowing tale of betrayal and survival became an epic saga of divine retribution and unyielding love. Her journey from discarded, brutalized Omega to the revered white lichen queen shatters the classic damsel in distress. True royalty is defined by resilience and mercy, not just. Her sisters, blinded by vanity, hollowed out by greed, engineered their own spectacular collapse. Every scheme, every cruelty, every whispered betrayal. It all circled back. Because karma in the lichen world doesn't negotiate. It doesn't delay. It devours. King Caspian waited a century, not just for a mate, for something rarer, an equal. A force that would crack open the moral foundations of their society and rebuild them from raw stone. And the shadows? The ones meant to swallow Cora whole, to erase her, to break what couldn't be bent? They did the opposite. They sharpened her light until it burned.